Hi everyone, how's it going? We are back once more for a Blast from the Past matchup. For those of you who haven't watched any of my previous videos tagged with the Legacy tag, be sure to do so. With the Blast from the Past tournament date drawing very near, this Friday in fact, we are going to cover our very final matchup. This comes from the Data and Destiny meta and features Foodcoats versus Book of Kate. Now this is a very classic matchup, mostly for two reasons. Firstly, this was a matchup that was seen at Worlds 2015. It was the pinnacle of competition, so this was basically the best deck arguably the best decks you can get at that time. Secondly, it happened after the Data and Destiny big box was released, so this provided a very stable point for the meta to shape up. Compared to somewhere in the middle of a cycle where things are more in flux and the cycle may not have shaped out as the way the designer might have wanted it to, because it's in the middle of the cycle, not all cards are released just yet. So yes, because of this, Foodcoat versus Book of Kate, which is essentially prepaid Kate, is one of the most classic matchups of all time. So without further ado, we're going to get into the match. Here are the deck lists for your reference. Do pause the video if you want to look at them, otherwise we'll begin right now. Alright, now stay with me. This game might be a bit long, but it has all the qualities of what makes this a very good matchup. So my opponent immediately goes to work with a remote. That looks like a campaign. I can't really contest it this turn, so instead I go for the Dirty Laundry and I see a Breakaway Grid. Very curious. If it's a campaign in the remote, why didn't my opponent install a Breakaway Grid in there? I kind of figured that wasn't a campaign after that. So yeah, this is very interesting. The fact that my opponent did not res whatever was in server 1 at all. Interesting. So there are very few things that it could be. It could be a defensive upgrade, or it could be an agenda that my opponent might be sneaking out. I'm not sure why my opponent would sneak out an agenda this early on without protecting HQ on turn 1, so I left it there. My opponent then installed a second item in the remote. Now, usually it's quite bad for me to run the remote, because with me being so poor, I have a daily cast ticking and only 6 credits to my name. I can't possibly run it and trash it. What looks like a campaign on a Breakaway Grid or a defensive remote. So I think there's not much point in trying to trash it, but with a stim hack, this changes things. If it's a Breakaway Grid into an Eve, I can actually trash it for 7 of my 9 stim hack credits. So this is what I'm trying to aim for here. I'm going to stim hack into the remote and try to clear everything in there. This will be good for me because this means my opponent will not get an economy foothold. Now my opponent doesn't rest the outermost ice. I was expecting to have to tutor out a Cyber Cypher or a Lady, but my opponent lets me through. So with 9 whole credits, I think, it might be a waste if I don't get something with the SMC. So I just grab Mimic, and I see a beta test on the Breakaway Grid. Now this explains everything. My opponent didn't draw a campaign. This is why they weren't able to res a campaign on turn 2. This was why my opponent had a Breakaway Grid in hand for me to trash. The beta test, which looked like an agenda, the beta test, which looked like a campaign, was supposed to be for me, but I couldn't get it because it looked like a campaign on a Breakaway Grid, which most Kates wouldn't contest. But in that position, I happened to have the stim hack. With the stim hack, that gave me the impetus to run the server and convert the beta test, which was supposed to be my opponent's, into mine. So that's huge. This is very important. Now my opponent gets an Eve Breakaway Grid server going and then quickly rushes out an agenda in the remote. One has to figure that my opponent's rather flooded for this to happen. Now I'm not going to bite it because it does look like an NAPD. I don't think I can contest an NAPD at this point behind double ice, so I give it to my opponent. Now it's at this point that I should actually be attempting to run HQ instead of R&D. But I have an R&D installed, so I went for R&D instead. My opponent doesn't res. Again, another big hint that I should be going for HQ instead, given my opponent isn't bothering with the res. So with 22 credits, I decide to run the remote instead of HQ, and voila! Eve and Breakaway Grid are going down because I have the Mimic pre-installed. That was really nice. I actually brought the correct breaker with the stim hack SMC run earlier on, and was able to break through the architect that my opponent now reses with relative ease. So if I were an astute player right here, I would actually be pummeling HQ at this point. I really should be. Instead, I'm going for R&D for some unbeknownst reason. This is quite a mistake by me. It is quite apparent by this point that if my opponent's not resing anything on R&D, it means that they want the credits to protect HQ. I should have been wary of that. So yeah, I'm misplaying a bit here. I draw into a Maker's Eye, and I'm very annoyed because there's a Crisium Grid on R&D which I didn't bother trashing for the past 2 runs. Now I'll have to trash it if I want to get a Maker's Eye going. I was very much tunnel vision into R&D given I had the R&D Eye out. I did not see HQ as a viable line of play. Big mistake. So I'm going to play quality time here. I draw a prepaid, and a Lucky Find, and an Astrolabe. Now, normally you install the prepaid here. Prepaid is always the first thing you install, the card that you look for against the Glacier decks because of the drip economy. But there's no point installing the prepaid here when I'm not going to use its credits, so I might as well wait to install it next turn. This turn, I'm going to spend my money trashing the Crisium to set myself up for a Maker's Eye run next turn. Also, I leave the prepaid in my hand so that I can set it up with the Lucky Find next turn, which means that this turn, to use my K credit, I would install an Astrolabe instead. All looks good. My opponent suitably defends with an Ice on R&D. Seeing that I trash the Crisium, they must know about Maker's Eye. So I hold off for now. I don't plan to Makers just yet because I wanted to use my prepaid credits on Lucky Find. Now I can afford to use the prepaid credits to play Sure Gamble. Interesting. I could have gone for Maker's Eye here instead. I check my deck. Wonder if I have the correct breakers. Still, I'm just going to make a normal run on R&D here. I see an Enigma. I'm going to break it with Gordian Blade, which is in the bin. So I use 1 clone chip there. And then head on to an Eli, which I use the SMC for. So now I have my entire rig set up. Barrier Breaker, Decoder, Killer, along with a David. Covers all the ice for now, and I see 2 cards, not very relevant. Again, I should be pummeling HQ here. I'm not sure why I'm not doing that. Big mistake. Okay, so I draw into lots of cards, events basically. Events that require the use of my prepaid. And you notice I'm being very conservative with my event usage. I want to try to only use 1 per turn so that I can get the maximum discount using prepaid voice pads. My opponent draws 1 card off the top of their deck, which means that R&D is now fresh. This would be a perfect turn to play Maker's Eye. And hence I do. There goes the Maker's Eye. It's very cheap. Notice I ran last click here because I want to save the 1 credit from Enigma. Every credit counts in this matchup. I see an Ash, which I don't trash. I see a Caprice, which goes in the bin. And I see a Donis and Ichi too. Caprice goes in the bin rather safely here because I know my opponent used Archive Memories earlier on. This means that they cannot resurrect Caprice with Archive. Oh wait, they ran a second one, of course. So here comes the second Archive with the Caprice going in that remote. Well, I can't do anything about that. Let's continue hitting HQ. Yeah, about time I realized that HQ was a valid server. Here we go. It's an Itchy. I'm going to click through it, and I'm going to take the trace. I see an Architect. Okay, interesting. So my opponent might not be flooded after all. But they seem to be setting up a pretty good server there, server 2. And the EVE is ticking down slowly but surely. Now they have a fair number of credits, and as a result, my opponent's able to score. No! They're not scoring this agenda, they're double advancing it. So this is one of the biggest, funnest bluffs you can play with as Foodcoats. Because you have both NAPD and food in your deck, you can masquerade an NAPD as food by double advancing it. So this way, if I attempt to contest the server and I somehow succeed, if I end my run on fewer than 4 credits, which is very likely given that I'll have to beat Ash Tracers and play Capri-Sai games, if I end on fewer than 4 credits, I can't steal it. That would be a big problem. So, yeah, I decided not to contest it because there was too high a chance that would be another NAPD. And my opponent double advances it, and still leaves it there. Okay, I'm really not sure if this is a food or NAPD. He would have scored it if it was an NAPD, so it was probably food. At this point, I go for the legwork, which I've been saving up. I really wanted to use the prepaid credits for this, so I didn't legwork last turn. Also because I needed to click through Ichi, so this was something that I had to spend my entire turn doing. I see an Adonis and 2 foods. Jeez, my opponent was flooded. So yeah, apparently my opponent had the foods since very early on in the game. And had I ran HQ more aggressively earlier, I would have been able to, save myself so much, this much trouble. I only got the impetus of running HQ from drawing the legwork, but really I should be running HQ for single accesses every now and then. Now, I'm up 6-2. It looks rather advantageous for me. But that being said, there is something in that remote, and it turns out it's a global food. My opponent didn't score it last turn because they were afraid I was setting up for a deep dig on R&D. Hence, the ice went on R&D. My opponent did not see the legwork coming, and that was their downfall. Because had they put the ice on HQ instead, it could have been a lot tougher for me to get in. Yeah, I was expecting a legwork, a maker's eye there because my previous maker's eye was about to expire. So now we're in a very interesting position. Both of us are on match point. My opponent's on 5, I'm on 6. We both need one more agenda to win. There are still ABTs in the deck. So having just legwork, I'm fairly certain there are no more live agendas in my opponent's hand. There might be an agenda in the server that my opponent installed last turn. So I might have to contest that later. For now, I'm going to use a David token and 2 clicks to break through this Ichi 2.0. I could have used all 3 David tokens, but I wanted to save it because I might have to deal with Turing's and more Ichis later on. I'm seeing 4 cards of R&D, no dice. With 1 final remaining click, I am forced to run this server because if there's an agenda in there, I lose if I don't run. Might as well give it a go. If there's an Ichi on the remote, any Ichi 1.0 at all, I'm going to lose my entire rig. I don't have a solution for Ichi 1.0, being at the sweet spot of 4 strength. Because I used my stim hack earlier to steal the ABT, I do not have the stim hack available to grab an Upman for either from my bin, from my bin because I've already drawn it, which is very unfortunate. Now I'm gonna hit the Caprice and we're gonna play the side game. I'm gonna bid 1 because you always bid 1. I'm gonna succeed, but my opponent manages to res in Ash. And because my opponent gets the discount from Breaker Bay Grid, he saves 2 credits on the Caprice and another 2 on the Ash, allowing him to outtrace me on this run. Let's see what my opponent pumps this trace up to. They can keep me out if they want to, but if they want to score that agenda, they have to pump it beyond. If it's a beta test, if it's a 3-2 agenda, they have to pump it, and that leaves them below 3 credits, which is required to score it on the next turn. So this is a very interesting trace right here. My opponent pumps it to strength 8, thinking that I might not want to contest it. If I contest it, I have to spend all my money since I have 1 link. My opponent's forking me right here because they know that if I don't go for this, they can score out next turn potentially with the 3 credits. So my reasoning was that if my opponent was bluffing me with a non-agenda, they would have res and Ichi on the remote instead of attempting to play the Caprice side game. So I went for the remote, I paid all my money, and I saw 3 ashes in the remote. The remote is from left to right. Ash, Breaker Bay Grid, Caprice, Ash, Ash. 2 face down ashes. My opponent was rusing me so hard. Oh my gosh, I hate you, Laurie. Oh, wow. I just spent all my money on that nonsense, and I have no money left in my hand. This is the worst. Now, it's not all bad. The good news is, because I played the Maker's Eye last turn, because I went for the 4-card deep dig, I know that my opponent's not going to draw agendas anytime soon. If they had an agenda in hand, you would be so certain that they would have put it in the remote, the Caprice remote, the last turn. So from this, I conclude that my opponent has no agendas in hand, the server is all upgrades, and R&D still has 3 cards that are non-agendas on top because I've guaranteed that with the Maker's Eye. As a result, I have a bit of breathing room to gain some credits before my opponent breaks R&D lock. And this is very crucial. The next 2 turns are going to be so key. I can't even tell you how important this is. R&D is not completely sealed off. In fact, it's rather easy to get through. Because I was conservative with David tokens on what seemed like the final turn, I give myself an opening to run R&D as a Hail Mary option later on. However, I do need to get money. After analyzing my bin for some time, I realized that of my stack of 5 cards, there are 3 economy cards that have 1 Dirty Laundry, 1 Sure Gamble, and 1 Lucky Find. So those are the key cards that will get me back in running territory. This means that my opponent has very little time to short their defenses. He decides to ice up archives to get ETF money, and my first click was draw into dirty laundry. I attempt to dirty laundry. There's no free server. My opponent ice freaking archives. Oh my gosh, that is so annoying. I cannot run archives here because I don't have money to break any ice he might res. Oh, I could run HQ, but I know there are no agendas in HQ, so I will be wasting 2 clicks to gain 5 credits, which is suboptimal at this point in time. I need proper credits. Knowing that there's still Lucky Find and Gamble in my deck, I decide to click for credit and get a clone chip on the board instead. This gives my opponent the time they need to draw up massively to break the R&D lock. I believe there's still at least 2 cards left on R&D. Nope, my opponent just draws. Okay, so I go for the dirty laundry here. I have 2 credits exactly, which should get me through most things. Architect, Eli, you name it, I should be able to get through it. My opponent doesn't rest, fine. The dirty laundry goes. But because my opponent iced up archives last turn, I was denied the use of my prepaid credits last turn, so I'm getting much less money than I really should be. Meanwhile, my opponent draws a bunch of cards, installs something in server 2. Is that an agenda or is that a ruse? I can't tell. Oh, it could be a campaign, it could be a Jackson, it could be anything. Well, I don't know what it is, but what I do know is R&D is probably where I need to go. That remote is too risky. I need to establish R&D lock here. I could fail the Capri side game, so I'm going for R&D here. And I break through. There are 14 cards on R&D. And my opponent tells me there are 3 agendas in there, which means the last agenda is in the remote. My opponent broke the R&D lock and found the agenda and has the game in there. Let's see if I can pull this off. 3 in 14, I see 2. I see the beta test. Boom, shakalaka. Whew. Wow, that could have gone either way. It was so close. I don't think I was favored there at all. It really could have gone either way. So how about that? I could actually go on a lot about this matchup, but you saw just how many misplays I made from my side of the board. Most notably, lacking HQ pressure was a big deal. One of the most important things this matchup is actually the amount of pressure and the pacing of your pressure throughout the entire game, more so than your attempt to set up your board state itself, because finding the agendas is more important than assembling your rig. You could have a full rig, but if you don't see the agendas, you're not going to win, and you need so many of them. Global food is just so punishing. So I really should have ran HQ a lot more. And you notice that one of the interesting plays I made in the mid to late game was actually running the Caprice remote when my opponent was poor. Because my opponent did not have a good economy start, they were struggling a bit for money and so couldn't afford to res all the ice that they threatened by installing. As such, we got a very nail-biting remote run where I won the Capri side game, but ended up losing the bigger overall war because, yeah, I ended up having to drain all my credits on the Ash to see a blank card. So that was really awful, but it is quite important to contest remotes every now and then. Force the opponent to spend money resing their ice, playing the Capri side game, draining their money on the Ash, or at the very least, give them these hard decisions. Key cards in the Kate deck, as you saw, Stim Hack gives you the ability to do things you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, and Legwork just basically won me the game by fetching me 4 agenda points. On HB's side, all the cards are very solid. This is one of the reasons why everyone loves this deck so much. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people think it's traditional Netrunner. All the cards do something. Ice is solid, money is solid, but what really makes this deck sing is Breakaway Grid. It saves you 4 or 5 credits on your campaign, but the amount of economy it generates for you by protecting your defensive assets defensive upgrades is so amazing. Being able to rest Caprice or Ash for free suddenly turns these defensive upgrades into your favor massively. While your opponent might be able to trash them for relatively low costs, they have to get past the defensive mechanic, the trace, the side game, and that's what really tilts this matchup in favor of Foodcoats. Jackson Howard is a card that my opponent could have done with that game. If they saw even one of it, I don't think I would have come anywhere close to winning. Jackson Howard saves you from the early storm. That is what you have to weather as Foodcoats. That is something you have to look out for. Well, we've covered all the basic matchups, all the fixed deck lists, but this might not be over. I'm going to hold a second tournament with any luck, and this might feature different matchups, so stay tuned for that. might or might not happen. Till then, I hope you enjoy all the videos that I've churned out for the Legacy format so far. It's been really enjoyable playing and reviving these matchups. I hope you feel the nostalgia just like I did. Thanks for watching, and thanks for tuning in. See you around next time. Happy net running. Goodbye.